Head towards that. There we go. All right. Welcome to class tonight. Tonight we have a guest speaker, and she's going to be talking to us about being I want to call you a midterm missionary. She's not short term, it's not long term, she's midterm, which is the unique thing that we'll discuss. And we're also going to be talking about raising up nationals tonight and our role in raising up nationals. And our guest and her husband spend their time in 3 countries, kind of on a long loop, and just raising up nationals and going from one country to another. Before we start with our guest, do we have any questions about the midterm? You guys all doing good? Everybody knows what's required? Because I was talking to a student earlier, and the student was going to interview somebody that wasn't a missionary in a country for at least 2 years consecutively. So remember, that's the criteria. If you're going to interview somebody that had to have lived in a country for at least 2 years, 5 years is much better. And they have to have done it, one missionary on one continent, another missionary on another continent. Because remember, we're interviewing 2 missionaries from separate continents, and they had to have been there for a long period of time to go through that entire culture shock experience. Yes?
Can we interview them by phone?
Absolutely. You can interview them by phone or by email, by Skype, any way that you want. Phone's good. Because the email would be hard back and forth. You really wouldn't get that good of answers. Yeah, and just make sure that they're living in a country that they can talk about the gospel openly on the phone. Certain countries, they're closed access, or we call them restricted access, and you can't ask them all those questions. Right, you guys follow me on that? So be careful with that. So let's open with a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for Heather coming to be our guest this evening. We ask, God, that you will open our hearts, open our minds, Lord. Help us to understand your calling on our life. Encourage us, Lord, to take steps of faith starting now and never stopping until we see you face to face. We thank you, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, tonight we're going to be talking about equipping nationals. And before we do that, let me turn on this recorder so I don't get in trouble from the office. There we go. Now that recorder's on. All right, Heather, why don't you go ahead and tell us just maybe a brief testimony, where you've come from, how you got to where you are today, just so we kind of get to know you.
Sure. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Heather Gaona, and my husband's name is Bond, and I have a little girl, Brianna, who's 2 years old. And we have been full-time missionaries this is our 6th year. And prior to that, we were just minding our own business, serving the Lord in the local church. And we had gone to Mexico and done some outreach, over the years, but really had never traveled anywhere overseas. And our church began to send out missionaries. So we, needed to figure out how that worked and, what we needed to do as ministry leaders. My husband was a pastor for many years in San Diego. And so we sought some counsel and sent our assistant pastor and his family to Tanzania in East Africa. And then actually Pastor Trent, who I think was here with you guys a few weeks ago, he walked us through that process of sending out missionaries and then challenged us to go and visit them. So a few years, maybe I think it was less than 2 years after they left, we had planned a trip and wanted to go and visit them on the field, and thought, okay, well, if we're going to go to Tanzania, we might as well see if there's other ministries we can, check in on and maybe be an encouragement to. And we thought, this is like a once in a lifetime trip to Africa. We're never going back. I wrote that in our prayer letter, pray for us, once in a lifetime, no plans of ever doing this again. And so that 2-week trip really just, opened our eyes and really launched us in a direction that, never in my wildest dreams, did I think would happen. So, that was kind of the beginning for us. We just went for 2 weeks and then thought, okay, we got to do this again. We got to go for 2 weeks. We got to go for 2 weeks. But meanwhile, I was working full time and, just still thinking this was, awesome to be able to serve the Lord in that context. But yet my heart was being stirred. I want to do this more. And how do I do this more? And okay, when do I get vacation time again so we can go again? And so that was kind of the beginning and kind of our beginning of our missions testimony of serving overseas.
So you were on a short-term trip with a couple other pastors, your husband being the senior pastor of the church, visiting another church plant in Tanzania. Was it on that trip that God began to call you to further, or was it like 2 or 3 trips in? When was it that you really felt like God was calling you to make the change from living in America permanently to actually moving overseas?
It wasn't on the first trip. I think my eyes were open to the needs in the nations, and just also the not only physical but spiritual needs. And the verse, the harvest is plentiful and the laborers are few, really came to light. So I think my eyes were opened to the needs, and I think I thought, okay, I'll come back here and I'll do everything I can to support these missionaries and these, kind of like we formed a care team and prayer meetings, and I got involved with another ministry called Promise Child, and I just thought we'll do everything from here to make a difference there. But it probably wasn't until maybe our fourth or fifth time. We went to a few different countries on short-term trips. After that, in the country of Nepal, and then later we went to Haiti, and then my husband went to India. So I think it was probably like 2 years later where we started to think, like, what would this really look like? Like, could we do this, longer than just 2 weeks? And would the Lord, open that opportunity for us? So,
Right.
Yeah.
So we talked about so much starts on short term. God opens up our eyes.
Yeah.
And we talked about in our first or second class the purpose of short term. It's really for us. We help them a little bit, but we are changed forever.
Yeah.
And there's that slow, steady calling. We call it the slow boil. It's like God turns on the fire on that first trip, and then just gets warmer and warmer and warmer. And 2 to 3 years is the average. Into that water comes to full boil, and that means it's time to go. I'm called a missionary. So you and I were talking, and you had mentioned a story about your husband being in India, leading a short-term trip with high schoolers.
Yeah. So my husband went with another pastor, and they were
Brent.
with Pastor Brent Kaser from Promise Child, and he's also the missions pastor at West Grove. And they took students from Orange Lutheran High School during the summer. So they were going to be gone for I think almost 3 weeks to India. So my husband joined that as one of the leaders, and they went to India. And as they were sharing the gospel, and we were still praying, like, Lord, do you want us to serve overseas? What would that look like? Where? All of those questions that come through your mind as you're praying about missions, and what does that look like? And so the Lord spoke to him and said, as he was sharing, like, if you'll come back and train these men, they were very far out into the Himalayas, they'll go further. If you'll disciple them, they'll go further than you'll ever go, and they'll reach more people in this country than you could ever reach. And so, we were talking on the phone, but he wasn't giving me any information. I'm like, okay, how's it going? Just give me one story, like I was here, And but he didn't want to tell me anything because he wanted to talk to me face to face. So I said, what did the Lord do? And tell me what the Lord, spoke. And he said, I really believe that the Lord's calling us. And so, this is what the Lord said, and I said, okay, let's go. Where are we going? Are we moving to India? And my husband didn't think that would be my reaction. Right. He thought it would be, again, like another few year process. So he, all of a sudden, then his heart starts pounding out of his chest, thinking like, wait, like, whoa, I didn't know that was going to be a reaction. Like, am I really serious about this? So yeah, we just started praying and, started seeking counsel from other pastors and leaders and people that we trust.
And I'm sure there was a need for that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
So
great. So in that, we're seeing that God begins to call people in different ways, and He uses different situations and different timing, but all of us have the same experience. We get introduced to the need of the world. We begin to have the Lord's heart in our heart, and the more we go, the deeper that passion starts to settle in us. And it's only a matter of time until we have to actually give up everything. Now, just to continue with your testimony for a moment, did you have a job that you had to quit? Did you have a house that you had to move out of? The whole thing, right?
Yeah, so my husband was the senior pastor of our church, and we also both worked full-time. So I was a marketing director for a company in San Diego, and my husband worked for a demolition company that was Christian owned and very supportive of him doing construction, doing ministry. And so, yeah, we after we sought counsel and people were confirming, yeah, this is a need and we see God's call on your life. We started the process of, what does that look like for us? So I quit my job. We have a house and sold everything, all of our possessions, our car, and I quit my job. And I think that whole process was like another maybe 8 months to a year.
So about 3 years from
Yeah.
the first missions trip until you were pretty much on that full time.
Yes.
Now, did you own your home
Yes.
and you had to sell it?
No,
Or
we
you
didn't
kept
sell it. We kept it
Okay.
because we could rent it out and still make a little bit of money on
Sure,
it. So we still
right.
have it,
That's
but
good,
someone else
yeah.
pays the bill.
That's good.
Yeah.
And that's just a sidelight that a lot of us do that. If you
Yeah.
own a home, a lot of times it's better to keep it
Yeah.
and rent it out because it's always here for you. Property value only goes up, and
Mm-hmm.
normally the rent takes care of all of the maintenance of the house, and sometimes you get a little bit extra.
Yeah.
For me, my house was paid for by somebody else, and so all the rent went to me overseas.
That's awesome.
It changed everything for us. It was life changing.
Yeah.
All right. So the Lord spoke to your husband and he said, train nationals. Can you give us a more clear vision of what that would actually look like? What does it
Sure.
look like to train a national? Because we have in our minds this idea of there's this huge world and massive needs. How do we actually begin fulfilling those? And I know this is with your giftings and your husband's giftings. It's going to be maybe different than mine or my wife's.
Sure.
But in your life, how did the Lord shape that calling to train nationals?
What we did initially was those pastors or leaders that we were working with in each of the countries that we now focus on. So our focus is in India, Nepal, and Uganda, in northern Uganda, which is an area that's 95% Muslim. So we first met with each of the leaders in those areas that we had already gone to on a short-term trip and said, is this a need? Like, would you, have a need for discipleship? And we knew that most likely their answer, because they had always said, oh, if you were here longer, we'd have you teach this or we'd have you do this, So we were pretty sure, but again, we wanted to, just also get confirmation from them. So what it looked like was, in Uganda, there was a Calvary Chapel pastor who's a national. His name is Pastor Juventine. And he said, look, my plate is full. I'm pulled in a lot of directions, but I have identified these 5 or 6 guys that I really want to be trained and discipled and eventually for them to plant churches. I just physically don't have the time. He's also a medical doctor. So we put together a plan with him of what that would look like to train them. So almost setting up like an on-site Bible school or what we would call a school of ministry, where my husband would teach like intensive, like block class type setting to cover a lot in a shorter period of time to disciple nationals.
So let me just ask a question. So a block setting is different than what we're doing now. Right now
Yeah.
we get together once a week for 2 or 3 hours. A block is what, all day?
So a block is
5
all
days?
day. So depending on the location, in Uganda now it looks a little bit different. So in Uganda, like this summer, my husband trained from 7, or did Bible classes from 7 to 9:30 in the mornings, and from 4 to 6:30.
Okay.
So those like 4-hour chunk of time, or 4.5 hours, is everyone. So if they have a job, then they go to their job from like 9:30 to 4 every day. And then if they're pastors or in a full-time ministry, then they are with him from 10 to 12:30. So the pastors are there pretty much all day with a break from like 1 to 3. But those people who maybe they're the principal of a school or someone else that
Or they
wants
have farms.
yeah,
and
or they have
to work their
farms and they have to there's
Take
lots
care
of
of
different
that,
things.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you go in, and how long do you guys normally stay as you're training a national?
So normally we stay 3 months. So it's harder for those where we're working in rural locations to commit longer than 2 or 3 months to coming to be trained. Most of them can't just go away to Bible college for 2 years and forsake their family or whatever sort of occupation or farming that they're doing. So we've kind of found that it's a good length of time to train for a couple months and then come back around. So what would take a year, we're covering in like maybe 3 years, but in shorter chunks.
Right.
So
most people are doing something full time.
correct.
Okay, so let me go back to, you ask the nationals. So is it different in Nepal, different in India, different? I know you're teaching the Bible,
Yeah.
of course, that's what we do.
Yeah.
But does it look different in each place? And how have the nationals responded to you saying, what do you need, versus the normal American way is,
Yeah.
this is what we're going to do for you.
Yeah.
And they kind of say, okay, like that's nice, but we didn't ask for that.
Yeah.
Has that built a better relationship with this openness, and they're in charge and you're in a sense their servant?
Sure. We try to put ourselves in their shoes. Like if someone, just said, well, this is what I'm going to do, and, make it happen. So, if you put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, if I was them, what would be a blessing? Like, we want to be a blessing to them. We don't want to be a burden. We want to come alongside what their vision is. So our whole goal has never been to either replace the nationals or to start a ministry where the nationals then become dependent upon us. We want to equip them and make them confident in Christ so that they can do the work of the ministry, with whether or not visa changes or we're locked, we're kicked out of the country or whatever, right? So when we've asked them what would be a blessing, so in our minds, in my husband's mind, he wants to start at 8 o'clock and finish at 3, and he wants to do Bible teaching all day. But in Uganda, they said that might work in India, and that's what we do in India, but that doesn't really work with our schedule here. So this is what would work. This, starting at 7 o'clock in the morning and going until 9, and starting at 4 and going until 6. So some of those things, and being flexible in that. Or they would say, you know what, we feel confident in, we've studied through this book and this book of the Bible, but we really have no idea about the book of Daniel and Revelation. Or, so it's a conversation, and they're being led in, and trusting that they know what's best for the people that they're working alongside and that are kind of in their region. And so, we really look to them and value and almost adhere to whatever they suggest, with some of our maybe thoughts or experiences of what has worked and what we, maybe have you ever considered,
Right.
teaching on the Holy Spirit, or have you ever, we never thought about that. That would be great, So it's a conversation, I think, and sometimes it's easy to say, okay, well, this is how it works in Costa Mesa, or this is how it works in India, so it should just work this way everywhere, and it doesn't work
right.
that way. So it would be a lot easier on us,
So you guys
so
are-
working with nationals, you just have to remain flexible. I mean, I think that's part of it, and sometimes that's evolving and changing.
So you guys are following that. The last thing we want to do is impose what we think they need and go there and say, this is what we're going to do. We always want them to invite us and to say, this is what I want you to do. And then we get down to how you want to do that. And so in Uganda, I'm sure it's a lot hotter. So to teach through like 11 till 1,
Yeah.
it's so hot nobody can even think.
Yeah.
So they but in northern India or in Nepal, it's going to be much colder.
colder,
So you can do that. So
Sure.
all of this is based upon the region that you're in, and the people and the schedules and all the things that are happening. We did this in China, right? And
Yes.
it was similar, and they had us do it a certain way at a certain time. There's all these other security issues in China
Yeah.
that we had to be aware of. And actually, it snowed on me when I was there.
I remember.
It was freezing. I hated it. I actually had to go get gloves because I couldn't put my hands on the pulpit when I was teaching, because it would freeze my fingers, then I couldn't turn the pages of the Bible. So I'm wearing gloves and taking them off and turning the pages and putting them back on. And yeah, so
Their schedule, they had a break from 1 to 4 every day.
it was a huge break. Yeah,
It was
So they
like,
could
my
go
husband's
back
like,
out, yeah.
well, what am I supposed to do? Like, what do you mean you take naps? It's like a siesta, like everything just shuts down. And my husband's like, it's still daylight. Like, I got things that,
Right.
but that was their schedule, and we just went with what they requested, and, as did you.
So imagine, let's say a missionary comes from China or from South Korea, comes to California and says, okay, this is what I'm going to do for you. And we're all looking at him like, we didn't even need that or want that. How long would that last? About a week. And we might put up with it for a little while, but after a week or two, we'd be like, okay, that was really nice, and this is a really nice person. I know they have good intentions, but we just won't connect to them. So when you ask the nationals, they'll always say, and I've heard this, I'm just going to guess, and say 50 countries I've heard this in, come and teach us the word.
Yeah.
Every time. And can your wife teach? This was the first thing they asked me. Rob, we know you can teach, and we have other pastors, but can your wife come and share with our ladies, because the ladies never get trained. So in this Raising Up Nationals, do you have specific tasks that you do just with the ladies that your husband might do with you, but you would do independently maybe?
Yeah, so in India, the first few years we did, I did like a women's school of discipleship. So all of the like women leaders in that area came, and we went through a book of the Bible, and then we also went through like key topics. So we covered like, if you're in leadership, biblical counseling. We covered, how we did a Bible study methods. We did how do you study to teach the Bible, because I wanted to prepare them to be able to lead their own Bible studies. So yeah, we that took us like, I would say the first 3 years. So 3 months for 3 years. So probably 9 months. And then I no longer taught, then they taught. So that was the whole goal was, and they said, no, we want you to still come. And we want, I'm like, but the whole goal is to disciple and train these women. So we did that in India. And now they have their own Bible studies. So it's really awesome for me to go and to see them teaching verse by verse, and they rotate houses and invite all their friends. And so it's been neat to watch. In the Bible college in Nepal that we were a part of planting, there are girl students. So we do have like a girls only night, like where we teach the girls every Tuesday night. Okay. So because they're already in Bible college, they don't necessarily need full teaching, but I teach on specific topics that would be like the girls were graduating. We were there January through May, and they were graduating. So I taught on spiritual gifts, like how to use your spiritual gifts. What does that look like, in your village? What's the role of a woman in the church? So it just depends on the needs. But there's not. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. There's not an equality, like education is not, is given to men, but not always given to women, or opportunities are not always given to women. They have a lot of responsibilities. So I'm not typically teaching all day for, weeks at a time, but the Women's School of Discipleship was like 2 afternoons, for a couple hours. So, and then I teach usually, we have like once a week where we are with the gals in Nepal. So, yeah.
It's interesting that Paul did the same thing. He would go somewhere and he would plant a church. So he might live there for a certain period of time. Let's say like he was in Ephesus for, 2.5 years or something of that nature. He was in, Corinth for 1.5 years. I'm trying to remember, he was only in Philippi for 6 weeks, Thessalonica for like 4 weeks. So it changed depending upon where he was at. When he was in a place where there was local leaders, he would spend a little bit of time and then move on. But before there were local leaders, he would live there. So Heather and Bond are finding themselves in these situations where there already are local leaders. So they're not pioneering a work as the way we think of as all missions is just go and pioneer. Well, that has to be done. But if somebody has already brought the gospel and local leaders are already there, they always need more encouragement, more training. And so God then will send what we're calling Heather and Bond our midterm missionaries to go in, spend a certain amount of time with them, train them, and then step back. And I think you really spoke of it. If you stay too long with people that are called to lead, they won't lead because they'll count on you.
Yeah.
So you have to step back. So that's where I'm at in my ministry, is I don't go, and going back to talking about being an advisor or having this conversation with the nationals, I don't lead the ministry in South Sudan. My nationals that are living there, they lead the ministry. We're on the phone constantly, and I'm advising them, and we're working through issues, and we don't do anything major without all of us agreeing on it, but they're the ones living there, so I'm not going to go in there and impose my opinion on them. I spend time with them, train them, and then let them lead, then I step back. Because if you don't step back, they'll never lead. And they can't be given leadership, and you guys read about this week in chapter 7, they can't be given leadership until, or I should say they won't raise up to take that role until they're given the opportunity to do it. So you only become a leader when you're given the chance to be a leader. So there's this constant trade-off of how much time and when. And if it was unreached, you wouldn't be able to do that. You'd have to live there.
Correct.
But because there's a few pastors and a few leaders doing it, so it's exciting. Let's talk also about your job with administration, because it's teaching as well as, let's call it the technicals. How do you want to describe your other
Administration.
role? Administration?
Yeah.
But explain it to us, kind of unpackage it for us.
Sure. A lot of times in missions we think like, okay, yeah, I mean, and in an update, we'll share about, oh yeah, I got to, teach this Bible study, or I got to go and visit this girl's home, this orphanage, and people think often that's what I do 40 to 50 hours a week. I wish, I got to do that all the time, but there's a lot of administration, a lot of behind the scenes things that happen that aren't necessarily things that you probably would read in an update from a missionary, although part of writing the update is administration and keeping everyone posted and updated. So for instance, a lot of what I do is coordinate. We have a Bible college in Nepal, a Calvary Chapel Extension campus. So pastors would come and teach. Well, someone has to communicate with that pastor who's going to come and teach for a week. So they need to know, what airlines to fly on, what's it going to cost, and how do they get their visa, and how do they pack, So I'm walking a pastor through that whole process over email or FaceTime. Same thing with any short-term team members that come. Like we have hosted, I think this year I probably coordinated 8 to 10 different short-term trips where churches have come wherever we are serving. And so there's a lot of logistics that go into planning, but putting together a ministry schedule, and what are they going to do, and what does that look like on this side, and what kind of funds need to be raised.
And now you're talking from the nationals to the midterm missionary to the short-term team.
Missionary. Yeah.
There's so much going back and forth.
Yes.
And you might find that you spend 50 hours talking
Yes.
before you really get anything done, right?
Yes. So I do a lot of email.
How fast do you type?
Not fast enough.
Okay, because I'll get these perfect emails from her, and I'm thinking, if that was me, hunting and pecking, it would take me a year to type that.
No,
So
I'm not hunting and pecking,
okay.
but
You're better than I am. Yeah.
I'm not a fast typer like this.
Okay.
So
Let me just say, I appreciate Heather's ability to communicate on the phone or text or email. Because it's always the big picture. It's clear, it's concise, it's everything. You don't leave out details. So all I'm saying is that God has called people with this gift, the gift of administration. It is crucial in missions. I don't have that gift. I might see the things that need to be done, but I'm not the guy to put that together. And you and I were talking today about, I was invited to help lead a short-term team, and I asked the guy that invited me, please don't make me do that. I am not a short-term team leader. And I think you and your husband...
Vaughn ended up being the leader.
Became the leader, and that's when God called you guys to go to this more intensive ministry. So this administrative part. Now, in all of these countries, we also do child sponsorship through Promise Child, which is the outreach of Calvary West Grove. Tell us about administration with taking photos of kids and tracking what's happening with kids, and then getting that information back to the Americans. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, so I probably spend at least half of my time doing that. So the ministry is a child sponsorship program, which means that people here in the States sponsor a child for $15 a month, and that those funds are sent overseas to one of the countries that we work in. And so part of what I do is training. So I do training for the nationals, how to report, how to do financial accountability and keep receipts and reports.
How does that work out?
That's always a challenge, I'll just put it that way, to make a system that works for both, like a system that actually will work and is legitimate for our accounting purposes here. But when you buy a goat for a family, you don't get a receipt, so how do you provide receipts for every single thing, so we have ways to document purchases.
Now she's minimizing the amount of work that she's talking about. It's almost impossible to please both.
Yes.
The nationals are living in a very simple society where they just live and let live. It's like the old farming life. There's not a lot of receipts and spreadsheets and all this other stuff. But we're accounting back here to the States where everybody wants every detail. And because we have to account all of this to the IRS, not just our donors, but to the US government, we need to do this perfectly. So there's this bridge person between this relaxed society and this completely intense society. And how do you do that and not get in the flesh? across the two. I was talking to an accountant just the other day, and he said, when I'm sitting in my seat, he's a missionary accountant, he said, in one ear I have the chief financial officer, the CFO saying, business, 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 money, spreadsheets. He goes, in the other ear, I have the missions pastor saying, love, minister, the people, the sheep, take care of them. And he goes, I find myself in the middle, and I start to lose it. And I was asking him, because he's now 72. I said, are you going to do this much longer? He goes, I don't know how much longer I can do it, because my brain is being twisted and torqued all day long between this society and that society. And so praise the Lord that you're young enough to be flexible enough to be able to do this. Because truly it's a gift. And without people like Heather and her gifts, we couldn't do what we do. Because people always see the spotlight, the pastor, the guy in the newsletter, and that's all they see. Well, they don't realize there's 10 people behind that pastor or that key leader that's making that actually happen. The leader might have vision, and he might have faith, and he might risk his life, but without those other 10 people, he could never do what he's doing. So that's what Heather's talking about. So how much of your time do you find that you spend doing behind the scenes work versus actually discipling and teaching the word? Like if you were to put percentages on it.
I would say I do probably 85% behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes to make it work.
Yeah. And maybe 15%
up front
of things that people would see.
Yeah.
Most of what I do, people don't see.
Right.
Or that I could really that people really would care to hear about, When I'm doing Promise Child updates, which is kind of the third component of the administrative part, but also the people part, which is what I'm most passionate about. I mean, if you gave me a choice to sit behind a computer in my missions hut or go out and be with the kids and be in their lives, I would always choose that. Sometimes the other is necessary, but
you would choose the people.
I would choose the
keyboard.
people, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But sometimes I'm pulled, I need to do both. So with Promise Child, those children that we're supporting, it's not just about meeting their physical needs for school fees and food and medical, which is the platform we use. So we see that as a platform in a way that allows us to get into their life. So into their home, into their school, and it is meeting the physical needs, which is a huge blessing. But the vision at Promise Child is to then use that as a platform to be able to share the gospel and to be able to minister to their aunties and grandmas and their family members. And so that's the joy that I get to be a part of, is to also report. So I meet with each of the kids. So this past summer we were in Uganda, and Tony actually came during part of that on a short-term trip. And
Thank you for the photos, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah. A good photographer makes all the difference in the world.
I said that was my dream day in Promise Child. I had a photographer, I had a doctor, I was like, can you guys just all stay here all the time?
That's right, all the time.
So usually it's just me, and usually I'm meeting with children one-on-one. I either go to their school or their home, typically, or sometimes they come to me, but most of the time I like to go to them. And so I'm meeting with them, finding out how they're doing in school, finding out if their physical needs are being met, and kind of also as a check and balance system to our national workers who are there, all the time. I pray with them, share the gospel if they're not believers, but also just minister to them and love on them. And then there's a series of questions that we ask all of the kids, and then kind of extract, like, if I was sponsoring this child, what would I want to know? So then part of that is, when I come back to the States, is putting together those reports that are what you see like on people's refrigerator or bookmark with that picture, and that update, like how can they be praying, what has their support, how has their support changed that child's life. So that's the other. What would take me 2 to 3 months of meeting with kids every day also takes me a good month to type up all of those reports. So, yeah.
And you had said that when you're doing the administration versus the teaching, when you're with the kids, how much interaction do you actually get with each child? Like, you have this passion for the kids, and then with that question, how many kids did you interview? Let's just say, for example, your team, of course not you individually, but maybe your team, like on one trip in Uganda.
So we interviewed about 275 kids one-on-one. So, and that took us like 2 months.
How long is it an interview?
I would say probably at least 15 minutes, 20 minutes.
Half an hour.
Yeah. They want me to do it quicker, but I'm not willing. So that's the national versus the American, versus, they're like, Heather, we got a lot of these. And I'm like, but I'm really here just to minister to this child. So, Yeah.
So
It's a balance.
200 some 50 kids at a half an hour each.
Yes.
And then after that, writing up all those proposals.
And that's like, I had one other gal with us, one intern that served with us this summer.
Right.
And then we had a team come. So there was there was 2 days, I think, where I had 10 people helping. So, and because I pray for each child, so when I'm just not by myself and I have 10 people, I can have one person doing photos, one person praying for the kids, one person interviewing, one person, they also do thank you cards for their sponsors.
Yeah,
so
they write their own.
you
little
can, when you're
handwritten.
not just, when you have 10 people, you can get 10 times as much done in a day. So that was a huge blessing.
And organizing that short-term
Yes.
team and getting
Yes.
them out and their housing and their transportation.
So total this summer
their
we
food.
did like
Wow.
420 kids.
in all three countries.
In a 2-month period.
In Uganda only.
Typically I do
Okay.
like 600 and some a year, 650.
So
So,
with that said, I was talking with the administrator in the American office of Promised Child, and she was asking for people that want to go and just interview kids. And it's pretty much 5 or 6 countries that we're in,
Yes.
South Sudan being one of them, Haiti being another one, and we need a group of people that are willing to take 2 or 3 weeks and just go do exactly what you're talking
Yeah.
about. And it's a major need. I have 2 girls that go with me that are former parts of our college class here that go with me to South Sudan, and not many other people want to go to South Sudan because it's dangerous, it's kind of really off the beaten path. And we need people that can come over and just do that. So Uganda, South Sudan, where else? Nepal,
we have kids
India,
in Nepal, India, and Haiti.
and Haiti. And we had to stop the thing in Tanzania.
Correct.
Yeah, we weren't able to manage that well. So there's a great need. So if you guys feel called to that, just pray about it. Heather, you can go with her. You can go with one of the girls that goes with me to South Sudan. Like I keep trying to get Heather to South Sudan because I know I need her, but she's got way too much going on. At least I have 2 other girls that have been with me for a while. So the door is open. That's something that you can do. So with these kids and loving on these kids, you had mentioned about writing newsletters. Let's go back to what Wes talked to us about last week. Wes said when you're writing a newsletter, don't just go through all of the details. Today I interviewed 20 kids and just like click, 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 just a bunch of details. What do we do in a newsletter? We start with a story of a child. Today I met so-and-so, let me tell you their story. And then you tell that child's story, and you have a photo with you and that child, or that child and their family, or whatever, just to put context with it. And then you talk about how God's moving in that child's life, and then how blessed you are for the God to allow you to be a part of what He's doing in that child's life. So it's not, I interviewed 400 kids, and we did this, and we did that. It's one story, one person, and what God's doing. We make much of God and little of ourselves.
Yeah.
But allowing the people to know that your support is doing this. So we have to talk about ourselves, but not that much.
Yeah.
Would you agree, Heather? Is that how you kind of write your newsletters?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I mean, even one of my newsletters this summer was about a child that my parents had sponsored. Her name is Nadia. And they've sponsored her since I think she was maybe 8. And my parents a few years ago both went to be with the Lord. And so my husband and I, they sponsored kids in Haiti and also in Uganda. And so my brother took the kids in Haiti and we took the kids in Uganda. And so last year, Promised Child provided for all the kids to go to a youth conference at the Calvary Chapel that we work with there. It was a big high school outreach, several hundred youth came. And so she gave her life to Christ at that conference. And so, this year to be able to see her and to hear her testimony and to hear now she's on an outreach team that's sharing the gospel. I asked her to share the gospel with me, just to see how much she really, and just to see her understanding, and so, being able to spend time with her and pour into her and just disciple her and encourage her, because no one in her family, she's the first Christian in her family, and lots of Muslim uncles and people opposition to her committing her life to Christ. But just one of those special moments. So then we had a women's conference. She's standing in the front row worshiping the Lord. She's 16, and I'm just looking over wow, God, you just work in ways that we could never plan, but just to be able to see fruit, and of course that's not every kid in the program, but there's just those moments that the Lord lets you see, okay, you did interview 20 kids today and you're exhausted, but remember those 3 girls you shared the gospel with 2 years ago? Well, now, they're walking with Christ, or somebody that we partner with has been mentoring them or discipling them. So
Yeah, and the privilege.
yeah, it's such a privilege to
to be
see
a
how
part of-
God works.
How many kids total in Promised Child?
There's almost 1,000 kids, I think,
Yeah, about
in the
1,000
program.
kids. Yeah, and it started with one girl in India
One girl, Nepal.
10 years ago. One girl in Nepal 10 years ago. Now there's 1,000 kids.
Yeah,
And these are kids that are being blessed in every part of their life, and their entire communities are being changed. Yeah, how exciting.
Very
I'm
exciting.
so thankful for the ministry. Heather and I are both on the board at Promised Child, so we speak of it like it's family, because
Yeah.
it's part of what we're doing. All right, let me move to another question. The unique calling, the midterm missionary. Heather and I were discussing this, and we were like, well, we can't really call you short term because you spend months at a place and you go back there constantly. But we can't call you long term because you don't live there consecutively. Now, people can come home on furlough, but they don't live in one place consecutively for 2 or 3 years. So we're going to just kind of coin the phrase for tonight, and let's call it the modern way, not the only way, but it's a way that's open now that wasn't open before. For example, the man that trained me in culture, he talked about getting a call to go to India and going through some training in California, and then taking 6 months to travel to India. This was in 1950. He took a bus from Lake Arrowhead to LA, took a train to New York, waited on the docks for a week, and then took a boat to London, waited there for another 4 or 5 weeks, worked the dock, and then took another boat to somewhere through the Suez Canal, and finally made it to the west coast of India, but his location was on the east coast, so then it was trains for weeks through India to finally get to where you're supposed to be. So also, from the time you said goodbye to your family until you arrived, he goes 6 months. And he goes, that was the best culture training I ever had. 6 months, so that was in the old
Yeah.
days. I lay all that out to say, in the old days when people went, they didn't go and come, right? They would just go, and they'd be gone for 4 years. So it'd be like 6 months there, 3 or 3.5 years serving, and then a few months coming back. With modern air travel and the ability and the financial abilities that we have, especially in Southern California, with all of the things going on, we're able now to go somewhere quickly, like within 24 hours. We can be in any of the places that we work in. Within 24 hours, we can be there with them. Sudan's a little further because it's kind of another day of travel. But long story short, you can go somewhere, spend 2, 3, 4 months, come home, and then go back there again. So with Heather and Bond's calling, they've been called not to do that to one place, but to many places. So when I use the word unique, it's unique in the sense of they don't have a job in America and then they take time off and they go do missions. They're constantly doing missions, but in multiple countries. So explain to us about this unique midterm missions calling. Like, how did it come about? Was it something that was were you ready for it immediately, or did God kind of unfold His plan day by day? Or did you say in the very beginning, 3 countries, so many months in each country, and then we'll do this circuit?
There's kind of multiple answers to that question. So initially, when my husband, was sharing with me, I believe the Lord's calling us, to spend time overseas. I thought, okay, great. Where are we moving? Like, we're moving to one place. And so as he started to say, what if we went to each of the places that we've gone on short-term trips, where there's fewer laborers. So we had been to Haiti, we had been to some other countries, China and other countries, but we really felt like, let's go places where maybe not a lot of people, were going. So, he felt like there was a lot of people going to Haiti at the time, labor-wise, after the earthquake.
And why do you think Haiti versus other countries?
I think it's closer.
Okay.
It's easier to get there. It's not as long. People can go and come back. And
it costs less.
Okay,
great.
So
what do people normally choose?
They choose the easier, less expensive, closer,
we're
less
just
time on an
underlining
airplane,
that, we're just underlining that for a moment. Okay.
So my husband said, let's go to the farthest places that are hardest to reach, that not a lot of people will go to, that cost more money to get to. And so I said, okay. And as he said, what would it look like if we went to each of these places in a year? So three different places that were on our hearts. And as I started to pray and just said, okay, well, this is not exactly what I was expecting to hear. So let me just, pray and seek the Lord. And as you mentioned earlier, as I started to pray and just seek the Lord through the scriptures, the Lord made it very clear, this isn't, because I didn't know anyone. I only knew Pastor Rob and Heidi. I knew his wife in college. And people go and they move.
We were attending the same church, so we knew each other.
So I got to watch them get sent out. They were like the first missionaries I ever met, So
and we were the first missionaries we ever met.
Yeah. So it was kind of a learning experience for everyone. So I had only known a few people that had just moved somewhere. So as I was reading the scriptures, I was like, well, okay, this is different. I've not met anyone that was doing this, but it's biblical. Mm-hmm. So I came back to my husband and said, okay, this is biblical. Like Paul the Apostle went to different places, then he moved along, like he had missionary journeys. Okay, this is biblical, like not this crazy idea my husband came up with. So,
and let's just say it's not missionary tourism.
Correct.
Right, it's not travel, it's not adventurous.
No.
It's hard stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so then we looked at different variables. So visa is a variable, weather is a variable for what we do, as well as how long could people put their life on hold. In a formal Bible college setting, you can, people are committing to 2 years, but in a rural location, like in northern Uganda, and before we started the Bible college in Nepal, we were working with village pastors as well, going to them. So it was kind of like we were going to where they were rather than bringing them to a hub. So I think, the heart for multiple places, not just one place, formed that, but also visa limitations. Like we could be in Uganda for 3 months and not have to have any sort of special, like start a business or, become like a worker, like a full-time worker of a specific ministry within the country. So those, and also weather. So.
And your U.S. passport helps.
Yes.
Because most places accept you for
Correct.
3 to 6 months,
Correct.
no problem.
Okay. If you want to live there, there's a lot more hoops you have to jump through.
But 3 to 6 months for most of these
Correct.
countries, we can just go there.
Correct.
Right.
So that was kind of and also weather. So in India and Nepal, no one really travels, no one goes out, like for a training type situation during monsoon season. It pours down rain every day.
And you're on the Himalayas.
Yeah.
Even in India, you're on those terraced hillsides.
Yes.
So
there's
no
could be
messing
flash
around
floods and, people landslides and people can't get past.
So it's just wisdom.
Correct.
To go at certain seasons.
Correct.
Right.
And in Uganda, so the nice part was for us, the places we were wanting to, or that we felt the Lord was leading us to, in Nepal and India, monsoon season is like what our summertime would be. So June, July, August, and a little bit of September. But that's the best time to go to East Africa. So, they would say, well, if you come here in December, January, it's like a dragon that breathes fire and your skin feels like it's melting off.
Right.
And so you're like, well, if I'm going to pick some time to go out of the year, it's probably not going to be those 3 months.
Dragon breath isn't the time.
Yeah. So anyhow, some of those things factored into the schedule. And the first 3 years we were very regimented. So everybody, we would we start the year in India. We went to India the first 3 months. We went to Uganda the summer, and then we went to Nepal in the fall. Some of those things changed when the earthquake hit Nepal, and we had started the Bible college, I think maybe 6 months before that in Nepal. So whenever you're starting it, like we had started a new work, there wasn't anybody there doing the Bible college. So that adjusted our schedule. So now we're a little bit more unpredictable because now we started the Bible college in Nepal. Now, we spent more like 5 months there at a time. And then it's all going to change again. Right. So,
and blessed are the flexible.
Yeah.
And when we look at Paul's first missionary journey, Acts 13 and 14, it's a real consecutive time. Mm-hmm. But his second missionary journey, everything changes, right? And his third missionary journey, where was he? On a boat to Rome. Yeah. He was in prison. He was, in a shipwreck. So things will constantly change. We have no particular thing. Before we move to the next thing, can you just tell us a little bit about post-earthquake and helping girls in Nepal?
Sure.
How did the Lord open that door? And did you expect it? Was it something you thought of? Or was it a result of the earthquake?
In Nepal, we had talked about opening a girls' home. There's a high rate of trafficking, child trafficking in Nepal, especially amongst young girls in villages where they're just very, like the poverty level is very, very low, and people get desperate, sometimes, most of the time unknowingly, selling their kids. Thinking, they're going to have a better opportunity, but not really knowing.
Let me explain it this way. A pimp or this trafficker will come into a village and he's dressed nice, he looks nice, and he says to this very simple village mother, I can bring your daughter to the big city, she can work in my restaurant, we'll give her a place to stay, she'll do great, she'll send money back to the family, we'll educate her, she'll have a chance to get out of this constant poverty living in the village. And the ignorant village mother says, this is a great opportunity for my daughter. And what he does is he takes her to a place and he begins trafficking her immediately. And he tells her, if you ever try to leave, we'll tell your mom what you did, and you'll bring so much shame on your family for what you've done that she's trapped in a shame and honor culture that she can't even escape from this because she's been part of it. So this is happening by the thousands in Nepal, all over Asia, but Nepal intensely.
Yeah, so when the earthquake, so we had already had that in our hearts and we were praying towards that end, but the earthquake really, I think, sped it up for us because in any tragedy, sadly, there's people that want to take advantage of the situation as well. And that's really what the traffickers, were doing, is focusing on villages where their houses were completely decimated, and exactly like Rob, described. But it's just not that easy. You can't go to a village and pluck girls out just the same way it's illegal for a trafficker to do that. There's legal ramifications for basically fostering and becoming guardians to kids, in the country of Nepal. So we went through a legal process to become approved by, everyone in Nepal. There's like 10 different councils you have to go, lots of hoops. Right. I mean, you know that from experience. So it took us about a year. I think it was like maybe 8 or 9 months after we began the process of looking for a location, starting to, we had people, like families lined, girls lined up, but we had to do everything legally because otherwise we're putting our nationals in jeopardy if the police show up and, we have girls there that...
So if you respond by your heart
yes.
and your emotions...
So I would have probably gotten everyone in jail because emotionally I was a wreck.
They would kick you out.
Yes, they would kick me out.
And then all your nationals would go to jail and all those girls would be left with nothing.
Correct.
Okay.
So listening to the nationals is also a good reminder,
right.
Especially in those emotional situations where, you feel like you could fix it right now. You could bring her and she wouldn't have to sleep in a cow shed or outside in the open and, struggle and maybe eat one meal a day, maybe not eat for a couple of days. So, we went through that process. I don't have a social work, background, but then we became basically social workers and working with the government and working with our nationals. And Pastor Brent was a huge part of that in, just casting vision on this side for funding and donors, and then the nationals really helped to select them. So I got the privilege of being there at a time when the girls were coming. So I got to welcome each of the girls that got to come to the home. I mean, I know myself, I wanted to select everybody. So we only had spots for 12 little girls. And so to be able to hear their stories and, to welcome them and to see, but to also see, just heartbreak and malnourishment and abuse and just such, poverty that they were coming from, and horrific things, I mean, they lost their homes. Some of them had lost parents. And so, so it's just, it's crazy to even think back that was only like less than 2 years ago, and how far they've come because the love of Christ has really transformed them. So that's a ministry that the Bible College, has like oversight of, but it's a separate,
right.
Promised Child Girls Home in Nepal.
And did you catch this whole national, international partnership? Heather doesn't go out and find girls and say, okay, God spoke to me, and you're the one, and you're the one, or you're the one, because you would never end in a country that large.
And they would tell me all kinds. I would just say, yes.
The stories would go on forever.
Yeah.
But the nationals know what's real and what's made up.
Yeah.
Because people would come to me and say, oh, you're white, you have money grown off of you, we'll just give you our child. And the pastors would say, that guy's rich, he just wants his child to be richer than he already is. That child's actually the orphan. And so the nationals are the ones that pick it. Okay, so can you just, concluding this thought of this unique calling, talk to us about what it's like to be, of course, you were married when you were called. Your daughter came along 2 years in, and your daughter's now 2 years old?
4 years in.
4 years, so you did this for 4 years. Then you had your daughter, and your daughter's how old now? Two. So you're 6 years in, you started with just you and your husband, and he was just a sold out, so that made it a little easier. But now that you have a child and you don't have a permanent home, what's that like?
So, a lot of times long-term missionaries struggle with loneliness, and I a lot of times will share, like, I don't necessarily have those struggles, but I have different struggles because I don't actually have a home. I live out of a suitcase, all year long with my family. So thankfully, and, God's grace, He gave us a daughter who is very adaptable and loves traveling, at least thus far. So it could change, but yeah, she goes everywhere with us, and it's tricky. I mean, thankfully I had been already working in these places, so I knew what was available. I think it would be a little bit harder, or it would have been harder for me to not know what life was like, and then bring your kids into that. But because I had been serving, I had some ideas, but I try wherever we are to make that, I hear Rob's voice in my ear, wherever you are, be all there. I don't know if that was like your quote, but okay. So anyways, I hear you there. So I try to bring things that make wherever we are feel homey, like for her mostly, So if it's her birthday, I bring birthday hats and cake mix, and, if it's, so things that, for her are, everywhere she goes, there's that stability. So that same crib, that same, whatever it is.
Do you always feel like you're intruding on somebody else's home because it's not your house, right?
Correct.
You're in the States, you're in Africa, you're in Asia, you're always in somebody else's house.
Yes. It's weird. I feel that way more here, because here people are like, here our culture is very much like, this is my house. And, you don't want to disrupt their family, you don't want to impose on them. But in the cultures where we work in, everything is very communal. So even here, you would get a babysitter. Like, you wouldn't bring your child to this event, it's adults only. But there, everyone takes their kids everywhere. And basically, my home is always open to you. So I think I struggle with it more here, than I do overseas. But it might just be my own, upbringing.
Well, it's when we talked about it in culture, we switch gears.
Yeah.
I'm going to be American when I'm in America, I'm going to be African when I'm African, I'm going to be Asian. And so as you're switching gears, you switch gears into a culture that wants you in their home. And you come to America and you're like, do they really want us here? They're just being nice.
Yes.
So here's what Heather's explaining to us. This is the life of a pilgrim. And that's the word we use in the Old Testament. It's pilgrimage. It's on this journey. It's this constant journey. And the one thing that I know that we all have, especially as American parents, is we want to have a sense of ours, our home, our base, our whatever. We want our kids to have a room, and our little girls to have their special bed and their special decorations on the wall. I mean, we all grew up in America. We understand what that's like. Everybody wants their thing. And when your kids just have a new room all the time, and praise the Lord that the Lord did this while your daughter was young.
Correct.
So it's common to her. And know this, that kids just want to be with their parents.
Yeah.
And when they're raised this way, they don't know any different.
They don't know any different.
My child didn't care if she was in the middle of nowhere in Africa or in America, as long as she was with mom and dad.
Yeah.
Right? And when they're younger like that, but when they get older and they get kind of stuck into it. So we were talking about today is what's it look like in 5 years from now?
Yeah.
How's that going to work? And how do you do schooling? Like, this could be a season for them. How could Heather school her daughter in multiple countries when she's 6 and 7 and 8 years old? The biggest issue with missionary families is their kids' education. Even our nationals, that's one thing they worry about the most. Rob, we've got these kids and we're all working in a war zone, so we send our kids to the neighboring country to even go to school in a refugee camp because there's no schools in the war zone. That's one of our biggest issues now.
So my husband limits my luggage, but my daughter's allowed to have anything she wants.
That's right.
You know? And we really hit the jackpot now that she needs her own seat. Like, we have to pay for it. I'm like, wow, that's 2 more suitcases. That's a lot of more things, you know. I mean, it costs a lot, but you know.
But it all works.
So I always bring like, there's certain. I'm kind of funny about, like, I always bring like certain books for her or new, she always has her own toys. And people think like, we had a birthday party for her in the States and people like, look at, how are you going to get all this? I'm like, my husband, works wonders to like, just so that she has her own toys and her own books and, her own blanket and we make it work. But
So you're dealing with an extremely flexible mom, dad, and child. So just know that this is possible, but it's really, it's only possible if the parents, everybody's on board together.
And my child didn't have colic. Like, I have friends where
yeah.
it's like their kid screams every night, for 5. Like my child never had colic, doesn't really have any sort of food allergies or any sort of like social anxiety even as a baby or stranger danger,
Not at all, yeah.
so sometimes I wish she had stranger danger, but
you can see that Heather is very open. Her husband is like the smile that goes on forever. Like every time your husband teaches, my wife goes, I just wish he would teach me every week. Just Jesus pours out of him. So you've got this mom and dad that want to do it, and their child is just taking part in all that. So,
and I think sometimes your kids pick up on that. Like if you're friendly and you're welcoming to people, your kid, and you feel at peace, like I feel like when I am, she can sense that, like if I feel like this isn't, but if I'm stressed out and feel like, and I'm struggling, like even last summer when we dealt with the refugee crisis in Sudan, I was really having a hard time emotionally.
Right.
Your kids can pick up on that.
Sure.
But if you feel, if you're in the Lord's will, like there's nowhere else you'd rather be. There's no guarantee that if I was here in America, my, daughter would be healthy and, better for having one room than multiple.
She's better. She's better serving. Yeah. What's our biggest issue in America?
Things
we
cross
spoil
your
our
mind.
kids.
Yeah.
So this might not last forever, but for now, that's what you guys are going to continue to do.
Correct.
The life of the pilgrim. And what it teaches you is that heaven is your home.
Yeah.
Your home isn't a building. It isn't a city. It's the people of God in the plan of God on your way together to our eternal home with the Lord. And so to me, it sets us free.
Yeah.
This whole concept of being a pilgrim sets us free. All right, let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and we'll ask Heather some more questions.
Sounds great.
All right.